Welcome to Perspectives in Mobile, the news podcast from the Mobile Ecosystem Forum. Join us discussing the world of telecommunications, technology, and mobile innovations. From London, Dario Betty, MEF CEO.
Hello everyone and welcome to Perspectives in Mobile, the podcast of a mobile ecosystem forum where we look at the different elements that make this ecosystem for different people, their different perspectives, and all the different ideas that are shaping the industry, the consumers, the expectations, the experiences in mobile. And today we're doing that with Barbara Langer. Barbara, welcome. Barbara, you are from Inside Angels, I should say Angels is Inside. Probably that should be explaining itself what you're doing. You're helping companies to understand their markets, to run research in different aspects. And for us, for Mobile Ecosystem Forum, for the last 5 years, you've been running and doing a very important consumer trust survey for us. Now, this is the 10th year. You've done 50% of that. Well done. Quite an achievement. But we wanted to celebrate the 10 years with a bit of a different perspective, asking you, what do you think about this market and this survey? Before I go and say anything else, I should also say that in your role, you work with many different companies, and in the past you've also been in-house with a mobile operator, with I would say an OTT player, so you can probably share all of that later. There are going to be more questions coming up. But for the time being, it's 10 years. So let's talk about the consumer trust study. How did you find the questions for the last few years? Is it okay running such a study? It's 15 countries, it's growing every year. How is it working with MEF in doing that? Let's start with a really tough question first.
Always fun working with MEF. I think this is a really great study to be involved in because it gives us such a broad perspective of users across different markets. To be involved in a study that's now across 15 markets, has actually expanded over the years as well, gives a really great unique perspective and a global view, global in inverted commas, view that you rarely get actually. So it's great to be involved in that. And it's quite a bit of work, of course, as well.
Oh, well. Fun. Now, let's go then to your work and all the things that you're doing. Because in the end, what you have introduced in this study is a specific index, the Global Trust Index, which we now measure every year. So where are we with the Trust Index on the 10th year in 2024? How is a smartphone user trusting the ecosystem as a whole?
I guess the summary is that trust is fairly mediocre at the moment. So just to explain a little bit about what the Trust Index is, it's a construct that we put together based on user perceptions around data sharing, and it's got 3 components of it. It includes how aware users are of how their data might be used when they share it. It includes how much they feel in control after they've shared it. And it also looks at how confident they are with the safeguards that are in place around their data. So things put in place by organizations and regulators, for example, to help protect them. So we measure those 3 components, awareness, control, and safeguards, and we come up with an overall statistic. And the best would be 100% and the worst would be 0%. We're currently at 55% globally. That's across all 15 markets. So it's kind of in that middle range. And I think a key point as well is that it's not improving. In fact, it went down a point this year across those key markets that we've had consistently tracked over time. So it could be a lot better, is a summary in terms of the overall trust index about how consumers feel sharing their data.
Okay. So to summarize, you mentioned 55% is the overall trust index for this year. That is pretty stable. cosmetically, marginally, there's 1 percentage point less than last year. Was it 56 and now it's 55? Is that correct?
That's right, yeah.
Yes. Now, you mentioned 3 components in there. Awareness, did I get it right? Control, safeguard. Is that how you come up with?
That's right, yeah. Awareness, control, and safeguards.
And each one of them, it seems to be pretty similar. Slightly higher on the awareness side, but then we got control, safeguards, still within the 50% area. So I think we don't have one that's 90, one that is 10%. So people feel relatively the same on each one.
Yeah, there's a slight increase in awareness in comparison to the other 2 areas. So that means people are more likely to be aware of how their data might be used than they are to feel in control of it and confident in the safeguards around it. But of course, awareness on its own is not enough. It could mean that they're aware of all the bad things that could happen. So there needs to be those 3 components in place in order to have a strong trust index overall.
I see. Now, let me ask you then how that works in terms of the countries, because you mentioned 15 countries. So do they all kind of line up with the same numbers, or do you have a different perspective in trust?
There's a bit of variation by market for sure. So the strongest markets in terms of the overall trust index are Indonesia, South Africa, China, and India. So these tend to be the markets where there wasn't a fixed infrastructure in place for the internet. They were very much mobile first in terms of technology. So that's one of the reasons which explains their slightly stronger perceptions. And the weaker markets are UK, Germany, France, and Japan. Japan being a bit of an outlier. It's certainly by far the weakest market overall in terms of overall levels of trust. So yes, there is quite a bit of variation.
So give us a number. So if 55% is the global average, and what is Japan?
Japan is down at 36,
Ooh.
And the strongest in Indonesia is 75%.
Okay, so we do have a large variation there, and because of you just mentioned the countries, there seems to be that all those mobile first or developing economies, I should say as well, Indonesia, South Africa, China, India, Brazil, even Mexico. Those are the places where mobile was first, so relatively more new as an internet experience, and they are more open. They seem turn it around to some of the countries that are more on the the Western European countries of US and specifically Japan, and then they sit at the bottom of this trust element. Okay, it might be cultural, it might be the way that we've been exposed to technology as well.
That's right, and it's also worth remembering that this construct is based on consumer perception, so how aware they feel and how in control they feel, etc. So it's not necessarily a perfect reflection of the reality of how safe they actually are. But obviously perception is really important because perception is what ultimately will drive behaviour. But that's our approach in this study.
So it could be a bit of a cultural, are we naturally more pessimistic, negative,
that's right,
or
yes.
How do we refer to the world around us? But fair enough. Now, the good news, though, is that we do see the trends and we have seen how things are changing. Now, can I actually... Potentially, let me ask that there. Some of these countries in the last year, have they had big jumps in one way or another, or are they all the same?
We do see a few changes, and so, for example, we've seen some reasonable increases in a couple of the already quite high performing markets on this measure. So South Africa and China have increased significantly in terms of trust. That's just in 1 year. So has Spain, which is more of one of the middle ranking markets. And then conversely, we see declines for Mexico, and which was previously a top performer, and another decline for France, which is towards the bottom of the list, the second bottom performer at this point.
Well, I think that if you want to have a bit of a football or a cultural comparison, used to be that Germany was leading the European pack in being the most skeptical about trust in the ecosystem. but now France came first. There it is, unless that's in Europe. And interestingly enough, Mexico, we don't probably know what it is. There'll be a question, we need to go and figure it out. Why? I see a lot of the numbers that are changing by 1-2%, but Mexico 13%. That's a big jump. So potentially there might be something culturally happening there. Who knows?
Yeah. And that certainly could be the case, because actually for Mexico in particular, we see decline that's as big as that across all the three components of trust. So it's not one thing that's driving it. It's a shift across the board for Mexico.
Okay, so Mexico is, and interestingly, because Mexico we added last year, so that we are seeing the first trends right now.
That's right. Yeah, it seems to be quite a volatile one so far.
Oh, okay. Well, so I'm the consumer trust data. If you remember, there's a lot in there, and you get the survey that is being carefully curated by Barbara herself, but there is more than consumer trust. It's the entire thing that comes together. One thing we've been covering for the last few years is regulation for the user side, because that's all consumers. Now, what are the things that consumers think that should be regulated or regulated more in this industry, in mobile?
So we ask consumers what their priorities are, where they think there needs to be more intervention put in place. And they are most likely, on average globally, to focus on the big tech companies and ensuring that they don't have too much power over personal data. And then following on from that, they're wanting there to be more controls over potentially harmful content that they can be exposed to online. So those are sort of two big areas that consumers are worried about. But it does also vary a bit by market, and there are some interesting results in terms of regulation by market, what the priorities are. And then in a few markets, we see some new things coming out in terms of top priorities, such as artificial intelligence, which is now a top 3 user priority for regulation in 4 out of our 15 markets, which is Canada, India, Italy, and the UK. So that's certainly something that's emerged much more recently. But yeah, big tech is a general focus across many of the markets.
Now, I look at the numbers, and big tech is 45%. So that's almost globally half of the people are saying that there are big concerns about a few companies having so much influence in their digital life, I guess. I mean, it goes outside of mobile. But is that going up and down year on year? If you compare it to 2023, do you think that is improving or getting more concern?
So there's been a very marginal decline in the proportion who say that big tech is their top priority or one of their top 3 priorities for regulation. But what we're seeing replacing that proportion is this focus on AI in some markets. So it's almost like people are becoming a bit more focused about specifically what they think needs to be regulated within big tech, and AI emerging as part of that picture and as part of that puzzle now.
Okay. So we are seeing the concern about big tech still big, but plateauing, while AI and, AI apps or AI services being checked and regulated, that's growing almost by the same amount. And that's about a bit more than 1 in 3 persons are looking for AI apps, right? 36% globally to be checked. That is the one that is growing by 2% this year.
That's right.
Yes. Okay. Well, okay. So plenty. We're going back and forth, but I think I'm starting to see some of the trends already, and maybe I should ask you, one of those you just mentioned right now with regulation, that kind of stability in the last few years with some of the numbers. Are we reaching a stalemate? Are things plateauing, as you were saying?
Yeah, certainly. We've seen a really interesting overarching trend across many metrics in our trust report this year, which is one of stagnation, where previously we were seeing encouraging movements in certain areas, such as the perceptions of mobile apps being easy and convenient and people's confidence staying safe online. We've been seeing those kinds of perceptions improving over the years, but this year they're failed to continue to improve. So it's not like there's been a really dramatic decline in these things, but we're seeing a bit of a stalemate, a stagnation, a plateauing in a number of areas. So another area is in terms of protective actions that users are taking to keep their data safe when they're sharing it online. And up until this year, again, we'd been seeing increases over time in many areas. And this year we're seeing a plateauing across a lot of those areas. So there's a general sense that there is a failure to continue to improve the experience overall for people and how confident they feel online, and potentially a lot of headwind being created by things like AI that people are unsure about, and a general environment online of feeling a bit unsure whether you can trust what you read, whether you can trust what you consume on social media, for example. So generally a lot of headwind that's potentially causing some concern for people and affecting their overall trust.
Well, you just mentioned social media now, so let's go a bit more in depth on that. We ask every year for the last few years, is there a proportion of you that would agree that, and then two statements usually, one about free speech, and the other one about trust in the content themselves. So what would you say that these year are things getting better for social media, for some of the big social media platform out there? Do people trust it's a free place to speak, or do they trust their content?
So these are things we've started measuring relatively recently in the life of the study. So we look at whether people feel that free speech is possible on Facebook and X specifically, and then whether in general they trust the content they consume on those platforms. And I think that the overall picture here is that people are more likely to agree there's free speech than they are to agree that they trust what they read. And those things are obviously linked. And the more free speech people think there is, the less likely they are to feel like they can potentially trust what they read. But the general trend is that there's a bit less trust than there was in terms of consuming content that is trustworthy on those platforms. We've seen a small decline for both Facebook and X. It's marginal, but again, it's part of this picture of general plateauing, general feeling that things are just not improving, that there's headwind around, and I'm not feeling any better than I was about these kinds of issues.
It's interesting because we're probably head-to-head with the Facebook and the X, as we reported. But it used to be the Facebook had a slight advantage over X, Twitter previously, as a platform. And you see that right now on the free speech, they're equally positioning it at 60%. As I say, very close. Who knows? We shouldn't read too much into that. But the 40% that don't think the free speech is potentially available to them on this platform, it remains for me a bit surprising, because I can understand that there are some limitations, but within some of those platforms, there's a very much an attitude to let talks happen freely. But what I'm also surprised is why there is no free speech. They're also saying that equally, I wouldn't trust this content, because that's the same percentage. And now Facebook has gone down, and even more. So I think you're starting to see that people are trusting less Facebook, 44%, than X, 46%. Again, very similar numbers. But it's a trend. There seems to be that something is happening. There's a bit of the two main platforms we're looking at here are kind of moving around in terms of the scoring. Anything else that you'd like to say or to refer to? Do we, by the way, maybe I should ask, do we compare other platforms for these questions in other countries? Because Facebook and X are not necessarily the only platform for social media. Do we have something else for China, or do we optimize things?
We do have something else for China. I don't have the statistics to hand, but most markets we look at Facebook and X, and for China we look at other ones that are appropriate for that market.
Which is a great sell point for me to go and tell everybody, you go to the website of Mobile Ecosystem Forum and you download either the executive summary if you're not a member. If you're a member, you can download the full survey, the proper analysis done by Barbara, as well as the data as well. In the data, you'll find all of those. But I have more questions for you, Barbara, because I don't want to let you go yet. The last one is potentially on the other things that are not traditionally the consumer trust study, because we do a lot of demographic studies and within the same survey, and we do track every year. The mobile apps. What people are using for their smartphones experiences and so on. Now, it is probably I should know this by heart, but we haven't seen a massive change on the last few years. Is that more of a slow burning? Applications are growing in interest, or is it something that really jumped in the last few years?
In the last year, there's not been a huge change, but there has been bigger changes in the long term, of course. So looking back a few years, we saw a big jump in quite a few different activities on mobile between 2020 and 2022, another jump the following year. And then this year, it's just sort of, again, using that word again, stagnated in most areas. So we still see that the top activities are entertainment based, so music, social media, gaming, and videos. And those sorts of things are roughly the same. They've gone down ever so slightly in terms of claimed usage in the past 6 months, but they're roughly the same, and they're still very much in the lead in terms of what people are doing on their mobiles. Where we see one significant change this year, and it's worth highlighting because it's part of a longer term trend as well, is usage of mobile or digital wallets. So there is overall across the globe more user acceptance of that behaviour and more claimed usage, more comfort doing that. So that's sort of one of the key areas that stands out.
So digital wallets are growing, and I see it's a plus 3 percentage points year on year. So that can potentially start to be a significant increase. Top of the list, listening to music, and then social media. Should be no surprise there. In there, 73%, 72%. Playing game, close by, 69%. We should probably mention, just for the pure news and statistics, but that makes lots of sense. When we used to do, we obviously have done this survey in the year of COVID, in the pandemic years, and using a health pass, something that some of us will remember, was application to just, check that you had the vaccine or something else. That's going down, as we would expect. And that is now towards the bottom of the list. 15% is still in there. And in terms of, as you are here, and we like this so much, in terms of a big long-term kind of trends from 2020 to 2024, which in itself is 5 years. Yeah, wow. What have we seen? What have we seen there in terms of these mobile activities? Are people doing more? Is something switching? Are things being moved around in the overall scoring of the most loved application by users?
So a lot of things have gone up, obviously, as you'd expect over the years. From a few years ago, quite a few things have gone up, a good 5 or 10 points in terms of how many people say they've done them in the last few months. One of if I just call out maybe a couple of the biggest shifts, one of them is for just online ordering of products, so basically online shopping. That's one of the big things that's gone up. And another one is sending money to a friend. So along with digital wallets, mobile wallets, it's suggesting that people are doing more and more financial type transactions on their phones. But it's worth remembering that these things are still secondary to those entertainment-based activities that we mentioned, such as the music and the social media. Those certainly are the biggest drivers of usage and the things that are most frequently done by users on their mobiles as well.
And because you mentioned the entertainment, I will talk about the other stuff, which is the work. again, because of the pandemic, we've seen a massive rise in terms of working applications or communication applications for your business and so on. That was 41% in 2020. It went down by 2022. So we had seen how things would change after the pandemic. But it's interesting to see that it crops up a bit. People are starting to reuse these working applications. It's becoming, the digital transformation is kind of slowly picking pace. We're not back at the 2020 peaks of 41%. We have 36% of people using a work-related app on their mobile phone. But more of that is happening. Interesting to see all of this. And it has been a big growth, as you expect, from the top listening to music grew from 67%, it was number 2, to 75%, number 1. So I think there's plenty of change. And Play the Game used to be number 1 in 2020, and now is number 3. So there has been some changes, some swapping.
Some slight shifting around the opposition, yeah.
And guess what was still growing a lot until 2023? Social media. That was, going very fast. And talking of plateauing, potentially we've seen that going down slightly this year. Now, plenty. We could look at these numbers for much more, but I think I have to let Barbara go. Before I do, I can't resist, because perspective is all about how we come to view a role in enterprise. You have worked in a mobile operator, Barbara, before as well. You were not just you were on the client side. And so there was quite a few years ago, in the last 20 years, if you want. What you would say that the main difference it is between when you were used to look at consumers 20 years ago and today in the industry? Any trend that you'd like to leave us with?
20 years is a long time in this sector, isn't it? And 20 years ago, I was working at T-Mobile, looking after a lot of their research. And I suppose the key change from then, and it won't probably surprise you very much, but what we were researching then was features and very specific tasks that you could perform on a mobile. And these were things like sending MMS type messages, and the value of that, and how much we should charge for that kind of thing. So it really was that the mobile was a device for a specific set of activities that were very well defined and understood and priced. Whereas I think the big shift that's obviously happened since then is that mobile phones are just simply a utility and an essential product in order to partake in most parts of life now. So it's really on a par with, almost the air we breathe, the water we drink. It's something that is just ubiquitous and needs to do everything, and you're kind of missing out if you don't use all of the things that they have to offer. So it's a fundamental shift in terms of the role they play in people's lives, and therefore how we need to think about them, and how we need to potentially protect the data that we get within them and through them and share through them. So it's really a big shift in terms of the role they play in people's lives.
Great. Now, thanks, Barbara. We really have to go. I know you have a very busy and packed day, but thanks for taking time to talking today with us, our perspectives, and I hope we will hear again from you soon. We are starting to thinking about next year, a plan for the consumer trust, number 11, I hope. Anyway, any ideas, any questions to Barbara? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dario.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Perspectives in Mobile. Join us next as we explore telecoms, technology, and mobile innovations. Stay tuned, stay connected, and let's unlock the mobile potential together.